All right, folks, let's talk about sexual ethics in Judaism. So we're going to do a brief overview, talk about Jewish sources on sexual ethics, and then some major Jewish teachings on sex. So in this presentation, we will analyze Jewish moral attitudes on sex by looking at two major sources, the Tanakh or Hebrew Bible and the Talmud. Now, in terms of the Hebrew Bible, our presentation has been primarily influenced by the essay, Desire, Love, and Romance in the Hebrew Bible, by feminist Bible scholar J. Cheryl Exum. And Exum looks at biblical attitudes on sex from the perspective of 4 books within the Tanakh. The book of Genesis, the book of Proverbs, the book of Judges, and the Song of Songs. So when we review kind of biblical attitudes on sex, we will take a look at some selections from these books. Now, in addition to the biblical sources cited by Exum, we will also look at the selections from Sefer Nashum, the Book of Women, from the Babylonian Jerusalem Talmuds. So we are going to boil down our examination of major Jewish teachings on sex to 4 major points as they are listed here. So let's go through each of them. So our first major Jewish teaching on sex is the following: sex is good. And this Jewish attitude comes from the book of Genesis, where it is written, God blessed humanity, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it. So in other words, sex is interpreted in the Jewish tradition as mitzvot, a divine commandment, and therefore sex is not evil, but is rather a good. Indeed, this commandment is taken so seriously that, according to the Talmud, celibacy is forbidden, as it violates the commandment to be fruitful and multiply. However, there is one exception. Rabbis with a passion for studying Torah can be exempt from sex and marriage from time to time. The second teaching, sexual desire is powerful and must be regulated. That is, the human desire for sex is, again, just so powerful that it can actually lead people into dangerous situations. So this is from the book of Proverbs. But he who commits adultery, or basically having sex with someone else's wife, has no sense. He who does it destroys himself. He will get wounds and dishonor, and his disgrace will not be wiped away. For jealousy arouses a husband's fury, and he shows no restraint when he takes revenge. He will accept no compensation and refuses a bribe, no matter how great. So the adulterous man is a foolish man, and his behavior will lead to his downfall. Now, one example that J. Cheryl Exum discusses is the story of Samson and Delilah. And Samson falls in love with a foreign woman who kind of plots against him. And this is his fate. So the Philistines seized Samson and gouged out his eyes. They brought him down to Gaza and bound him with bronze shackles, and he ground at the mill in the prison. So this Herculean figure named Samson is brought down by a woman because of basically like his foolishness, as it were. All right, so sex is good, but it can be dangerous, right, if it is used improperly. So what is the proper kind of use of sex? Well, sex is to be used primarily for reproduction. And if you ever read the book of Genesis, you will notice passages like this. Now the man knew his wife Eve, and she conceived and bore Cain. Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. So there's kind of this motif in the book of Genesis that, that sex is used for reproduction. Now, sex in the Bible is not so crudely mechanistic. That is, there is some romance to it as well. And so this brings us to our fourth Jewish teaching. Mutual sexual longing and intimacy between a man and a woman is good within the confines of marriage. So we have the selection from the book of Proverbs again. Let your fountains be blessed and rejoice in the wife of your youth. A lovely deer, a graceful doe. May her breast satisfy you at all times. May you be intoxicated always by her love. So in other words, marriage shouldn't be just about reproduction. It should be about, rejoicing, in sex and, enjoying it for pleasure and for love. Indeed, the medieval rabbi and philosopher Nachmanides said, one should know that sexual union is holy and pure when it is done as it should be, at the time it should be, and with proper intent. So Nachmanides even argues that sexual union can indeed be holy and pure within the confines of marriage. However, there is one text in the Hebrew Bible, the Song of Songs, which is this erotic poem of sexual longing between a man and a maiden, both of whom are unmarried. And J. Sherrill Exum argues that the Song of Songs is the only example in the Hebrew Bible where fervent sexual desire between unmarried people is celebrated. So with the exception of the Song of Songs, according to the Jewish tradition, sex is to be experienced by a man and a woman within the institution of marriage. But according to the Jewish tradition, what does sex look like within the confines of marriage? Well, let's turn to the Talmud. So in the book Sefer Nashim from the Talmud, there's three interesting teachings here. One is that women have conjugal rights over their husbands. That is, they have a right to have sex with their husbands really whenever they want, so they have a right over their husbands' bodies. However, on the flip side, husbands must have consent from their wives before engaging in sex, so they don't have quite the same conjugal rights. And the frequency of sex depends upon the occupation of the man. So the Talmud actually discusses how often a man and a woman should have sex in their marriage. So with these teachings in mind, I just want us to take a look at three quotes from the Talmud, which kind of bring these teachings to life. So here's one. It is permissible for a woman to authorize her husband to ignore her conjugal rights. When does this apply? When he has children already and has fulfilled the mitzvah to be fruitful and multiply. If, however, he has not fulfilled the mitzvah of being fruitful and multiplying, he is obligated to engage in sexual relations whenever his conjugal duties require until he fathers children. So in other words, if the wife in the marriage wants sex, the man cannot turn her down unless he has already fathered children. So if he has not fathered her children, then he cannot turn down her requests or demands for sex. She has conjugal rights over his body. Another quote, the obligation of conjugal rights as prescribed by the Torah is individual in nature, depending upon the strength of each particular man and the type of work that he performs. What is implied? Well, healthy men, as we can see in the bold, must have sex with their wives every night. Workers must have sex with their wives twice a week. But if they work in another city, once a week will do. And donkey drivers and camel drivers and seamen are permitted to or are encouraged to have sex with their wives either once every 30 days or once every 6 months. So it's interesting that there's very specific teachings as to the frequency of sex in the Talmud. A man should never compel his wife to engage in sexual relations against her will. Instead, relation should be with her agreement, preceded by conversation and a spirit of joy. So to begin with, there's kind of an insinuation here that there should be, a little bit of foreplay, a little bit of sweetness. And a man can never have sex with his wife against her will. So we've looked at some of the classical sources on sexual attitudes in Judaism, but what about kind of contemporary Judaism? Well, in contemporary Judaism, specific teachings on sexual ethics, like with respect to premarital sex, masturbation, pornography, etc., depend upon which denominations of Judaism one belongs to. And there's this really interesting article that I implore you to read called Judaism and Sex, Questions and Answers that I posted on iLearn that I would like for you just to take a look at. So in conclusion, what are the four major teachings on Judaism and sex? Sex is good, as we saw from the book of Genesis. Sexual desire is powerful and must be regulated, from the book of Proverbs and Judges. Sex is used to be primarily for reproduction in Genesis, but at the same time, mutual sexual longing and intimacy between a man and a woman is good, according to the Song of Songs, and is good when it's between married couples, as according to Proverbs and the Talmud.